So, hello, I'm Katrin. Thanks for having me here. I have the opportunity to present two topics today. So the first presentation is going to be more from the perspective of industry. So I work for Fibenol as a sustainability manager. So my views or this presentation is mainly from the perspective of Fibenol, how companies in the bio-based industry sector are assessing sustainability. And probably the idea would be completely different if here would stand a person who would work for the plastic industry, for example. So I'm presenting Fibenol here. And to understand a little bit more why maybe I see the way, maybe the way I see things here, I need to tell you a little bit more about Fibenol also. So this is our demo plant in central Estonia, in Imavere. We have a wood fractionation plant where we fractionate residual wood, so the residues from the forestry and wood processing industry, into lignin, cellulosic sugars and microcrystalline cellulose. And it's always really surprising for people if we say that, yeah, we have a demo plant in Estonia, and they imagine that it's like a really small lab scale thing, but it actually looks like that. And this picture is great. It gives a little insight also to our background. So we are a spin-off company from Granul Invest, which is one of the biggest pellet producers in Europe. And you can see on this picture that we are sharing some of the facilities here. So, for example, the CHP plant, where we get our steam and electricity, is actually operated and owned by Granul Invest still. Also, what may be important here, yesterday we already had some discussions about, for example, about the availability of different resources. When it comes to wood residues, I think it's also a really important topic. I would like to highlight here that in Estonia, there's plenty of wood residues that are undervalorized. And I don't know how up-to-date you are with, for example, with the Renewable Energy Directive discussions. It was already on the table that maybe in the future wood wouldn't be considered as renewable source. So meaning that probably in the future it would have a really strong impact on the pellet industry also. And to put it into perspective, for example, our fractionation plant, the maximum capacity would be to use 30,000 tons of dry wood residues in our plant. And compared to the pellet industry next to us, they are using 350,000 tons every year. So it's a small fraction of what is actually available there. And when we talk about sustainability, of course, we can always say that we are sustainable, we are doing things in a sustainable way, but being recognized from outside is also really important. So last year we were actually awarded with Baltic Sustainability Award in the innovation category, giving some credibility to what I'm talking here. So if we say that we are sustainable, then I hope it means that, or it confirms that we actually are. Thanks. and yeah, I've been working for Fibenol for almost 2 years, and I must say I'm not that experienced in the field of sustainability, but to receive an award for sustainability and working as a sustainability manager it feels good, I must say. But I promise you it will be connected also with the sustainability assessment. So I need to tell you a little bit more what we do in Fibenol. Of course, one really important aspect of our background is that we received funding. You may know us through the Sweetwoods project, and I'm quite sure that I wouldn't stand here without the Sweetwoods project. It has contributed a lot into what we do here. It has given us a lot of partners, and indicating here the global partnership over 300 different universities, mostly companies. And this is also important when we dig into the sustainability part. Partnering with more than 300 different companies, it gives us really good insight on what different companies are expecting in the aspect of sustainability also. So it's not a simple question to address that what actually industry is expecting when it comes to sustainability evaluations or sustainability criteria. And when it comes to our products, I already said that we produce lignin, sugars, and cellulose. But if I would ask you, what can you do with lignin, for example? There's endless possibilities. And it also highlights that how different are the partners that we are partnering with. Meaning that, I mean, I think there's also a saying that you can make anything out of lignin except money or something like that. So we are changing this idea, and I don't want to get into that, but it's almost, I mean, there's a lot of different application parts where our products could be used, meaning there's a lot of different industries with a lot of different ideas on sustainability also. Just highlighting a few. For example, our sugars could be used in the production of biosurfactants, which has been actually a really interesting aspect because usually what is important regarding sustainability is carbon footprint, the global warming potential, and everything evolves around that. My first connection with the company that actually, yeah, they were looking for carbon footprint also, but another important part for biosurfactant producers is eutrophication. So for me, it was really interesting to see that there's a company looking for raw materials that will lower their products' eutrophication. So, for example, this is a good example for that. But when it comes to different industries, for example, when it comes to road construction industry, when it comes to bioplastics, when it comes to road construction, lignin is a great replacement for bitumen in asphalt production. But the construction industry at the moment is not there yet. They are not thinking about carbon footprint. They are not thinking about sustainability, because this is one of the products that the consumer needs to pay for it, and it means a lot of investments. And usually, who will order the construction of roads? It's local municipalities, it's maybe private investors or something like that, and it's still evolving around money. And this is something that, I mean, on a larger scale, we need to think about green procurements and so on to make it actually, because it's possible to produce climate neutral roads. I know that there has been some test roads in the Netherlands. I think Sweden is testing some out. The picture that you saw from our factory, the parking lots and the roads around our factory are also containing lignin, so leading by example. So it's possible to be really sustainable in an industry that actually pollutes a lot. So something to think about. When it comes to bioplastics, I think this is an important aspect to cover, that we are facing the twin transition in a way that companies need to transit from using fossil resources to using bio-based ones, and from switching from linear consumption models and linear production models into circular ones. So the bioplastics industry actually in the moment, they're not looking for their carbon footprint. They're doing their calculations, but it's not comparable to the conventional plastics one. So it's an important aspect, and their selling argument is that it's bio-based, which is great, but it's still kind of different. And if we circle back to how to measure sustainability, it's not a simple question. But mostly, I think, even if we take into consider the different parts like waste reduction, water use, land use, carbon footprint, and so on, these are all actually parts of life cycle assessment, one way or another. So basically, the industry is really moving around life cycle assessments, but the quality of life cycle assessments is, I mean, as I said today in the morning, it's wild, wild west when it comes to life cycle assessments. So some things that I've noticed here, for example, the basics. For example, the data use. I recently attended a conference where dairy industry, one local dairy industry was presenting their carbon footprint and their product footprint, and they were like, yeah, our footprint is this and that, and but we would like to highlight here that we excluded the transportation of raw materials into our facilities. It's like, what this number represents then, it's because the transportation of milk from different places to their production facilities, it's actually quite an important part. So they are leaving this part out. And then when I asked them, like, why? And they were like, otherwise the number would be too big. And it's just marketing, our carbon footprint is this and that, and we reduced it with, 10%, but it actually doesn't mean anything if you don't know the background there. Also, when it comes to software, I think I also addressed it today in the morning with some people when we discussed this. Most universities, for example, don't have the licenses for the software that the industry is actually using. It's CIMA Pro, it's Gabi, and usually the databases are also quite expensive. So they are, at least from my experience, I know that in Tallinn University of Technology, they are using OpenLCA, but really outdated data and so on. So when the people get to the industry, they actually don't know what's going on. Also allocation, this is a really interesting part. I will show you one example from our own production, how allocation could change the output. And here I would like to highlight, for example, for some industries, you can allocate all the impacts to the main product, so the byproducts don't get any. So this is also something that we have been facing, for example, when it comes to life cycle assessments of lignin. And then we have seen also really interesting cases of, for example, from the leather industry, where they say that leather is a byproduct and then that it has a zero impact because nobody, we get leather because of the dairy and meat industry, so it's a byproduct and it has a zero impact, but I think it's not true in that sense. And also when it comes to the Renewable Energy Directive discussions, they have the criteria that all the residues have a zero impact, which is, it doesn't comply with our view, for example, because when we use wood residues, we have also done really thorough data collection on the forestry part, how many years were the trees grown, how much CO2 was sequestered during this time, how much diesel was used to maintain this forest and so on. This is also important. It doesn't come with a zero. Also, when it comes to goal of these life cycle assessments or sustainability assessments, of course, there are legal obligations. For example, this ESG reporting. I know that starting from 2025, all the SMEs need to also start reporting, but at the moment it's banks and big companies, they know that they have to do it, and I don't know who checks it, what's the quality of this reporting, but it's a legal obligation, so companies need to do it. Also, I really respect when companies are doing life cycle assessments in order to improve, to make their products and processes more sustainable, to find a hotspot. Let's find, chemicals with lower footprint. Let's find ways to use less water. Let's find ways to reduce waste and so on. So it's good, but it's completely different from the LCAs that are done for communications to partners and clients. Because when it comes to communication materials, it's usually done in a way to show as low numbers as possible. So there has been some data exclusions, there are some tricky parts, and without knowing all the details or background, what type of data is included, how the allocation was made and so on, this number actually is not showing anything, to be fair. Also, when it comes to third-party verifications, there is, companies are having different approaches on that. I think the most important or the most common one is the compliance to a standard. So they just verify their methodology and not the final numbers for the products and so on. So there's different standards for products, for example, environmental product declarations, EPDs, which specify quite specific requirements on how this sector uses life cycle assessment. So you need to do these calculations according to these rules. It's still tricky because, for example, in our case, from our product portfolio, we can make an EPD for lignin, but it only covers lignin. So it's one way to calculate this impact for one product, but it means that we can use different ways for different products. So it's not the holistic approach on evaluating the whole process and whole products. And also, of course, there are plenty of different certification schemes and standards. Greenhouse gas protocol, carbon trust, EcoVadis, there's plenty of them. I don't know which one is the best. At the moment, I think industry is in a position where if you have something done, that's good enough. And there's not too much competence in evaluating what is actually done, what's the quality of this certification or standard. So this is where we are at the moment. And when it comes to allocation, this could be interesting to see. I wouldn't like to call out like other producers. This is our own product, lignin. It's the same product, using the same process, using the same data, just changing the allocation. So it's the same product, meaning that the carbon footprint of the product could fluctuate between -2,000 something to 300 and over 300 kilograms of CO2 per ton of product. So it's meaning that it's a wild, wild west. And if you don't understand the background on how these calculations are done, you know, it's tricky. So what do you think? Which one we should use? depending on who we are selling, right? Or this is also a big discussion whether a biogenic carbon should be accounted or not. So the bio-based industries or the bio industry is really advocating on, yeah, we should use it, but there are of course other sectors that are not so keen on that. But yeah, it's something that we are facing at the moment, and to comply with different rules, we are doing all the calculations in all the different ways. And when it comes to bio-based products, of course, carbon footprint is still one of the most important sales arguments, because there is a lot of carbon reduction initiatives, decarbonization, and so on. So this is something that it's a really important part of what we do, but it's still a wild, wild west to play by the rules. So we actually really need unified tools and rules for CO2 footprint calculations to compare apples to apples, because in the moment it's apples, potatoes, oranges, and so on, all in the same basket. And how to make life cycle assessments better. This is from our own experience. High quality primary data is key. I think it's important to mention here that we grew out from Granul Invest, the pellet producer, but we have a sister company who is one of the biggest forest managers in Estonia, which puts us into a really good position, because we have access to primary data when it comes to energy production, when it comes to forest management, and so on. We have these numbers, but a lot of companies don't. So primary data is key. To have high quality life cycle assessments. And quite a lot, what I've also been seeing is that usually to be on the safe side, companies are using the database averages, meaning that it could be better, it could be worse, but they are using the averages to be on the safe side. So we need to move from that to start using primary data, and one part of getting this data is collaboration. We need to be more transparent in the whole value system, right? Value system, to get this information from our suppliers and to giving this information to our clients so they can make their calculations. At the moment, it's really secretive, so still a lot of companies are not sharing this information. There are some who are transparent, but still there's a long way to go. Also, when it comes to transparency in a way that if we have calculated our carbon footprint or done our life cycle assessment, then we need to be transparent about what type of data was used, how we did the allocation method, and to have like a good explanation behind it, not only the part that, oh yeah, we did this allocation because according to this we would have a really low footprint. I think this is not like a good explanation, to be honest. And of course, my talk has been really focusing to carbon footprint, but it's not the most. It's not the only thing. There's other impact categories also, and I like this term that, we shouldn't have carbon tunnel vision. I mean, we need to start from somewhere. I think at the moment we are slowly starting to learn what the carbon footprint is, but we need to move on from that and also take into consideration all the other impact categories. But to be honest, getting the carbon footprint from another company, this is already good, but getting all the impact categories, it's almost impossible. And when it comes to the standards that the industry is actually using, so there's this IPCC for the general footprint calculations. The EF method, it's more used for the environmental product declarations. So it covers a lot of different impact categories. And when it comes to recipe, it's also one part of making all these impact categories put together in a more understandable way. Because to be honest, if we talk about water use, land use, okay, this part is understandable, but there's a lot of other parts that for most of us is actually quite difficult to understand. I mean, where the impacts come from and so on. And for example, when we talk about our production, because we take into consideration also the raw materials part, the primary data from forestry, from energy production, our biggest contributors to different impact categories is actually the use of sodium hydroxide in our production and the electricity production in the CHP plant, because the combustion of biomass still is quite bad for the environment, even though it's much better than the electricity grid mix that we would get in Estonia if we would be in the general electricity system. So just, to understand a little, or to comment a little bit about the impact categories here. So the biggest challenges when it comes to life cycle assessments and sustainability assessments. So different sectors prefer different methodologies, so there's no unified approach. So, for example, if we want to sell some of our products, for example, the cellulosic sugars for the biofuels industry, for ethanol production, for example, so we need to do the calculations according to the Renewable Energy Directive. But it doesn't comply with, what the other industries are expecting. For example, the plastic industry or the road construction industry or the cosmetics industry. So it's different, and it makes. In our case, of course, we are partnering up with different universities and with different projects. So we have really high expert help when it comes to doing life cycle assessments. But I think for a lot of industries or a lot of companies, they don't have these resources to do all these calculations in very different ways. And to be honest, of course, it's not a cheap thing to do to make a really good life cycle assessment. So it's to make a life cycle assessment in 3 different ways, it would cost a lot, and it would take a lot of time and effort, and you need specific type of people working on that. So it's quite challenging. Data quality, as I already said. At the moment still, instead of primary data set averages are used. We need to move on from that. We need to collect data and start doing our calculations with primary data. It would be a big change. Also, when it comes to different standards, I understand that the methodologies and standards are done in a way that different companies, different industries could use them. But at the moment, it's giving the results that the data and using different allocation methods, it gives the leverage of manipulating with the results. So this is the flexibility of standards. So I don't know what the great solution here would be. Maybe like industry-specific standards, something like that. But at the moment, it's not the best situation, I would say. And another thing is transparency. What was included, what was excluded, and maybe to get to a point where no exclusions are made and so on. So transparency. How universities could help. I think this is one important slide for most of you. So integration of LCA concept to different studies. This insight came from my fellow youth ambassador who studied economics, and he said that it was really really business oriented, and he had no idea about sustainability, no idea on life cycle assessment, so on. So really depending on the field, it should be integrated in all the different fields. Also, access to different software and databases. It would give some insight on the real life, what is actually happening there in the industry, for example, and not using really outdated data sets, which are like from 2010 and so on, because the industry is changing a lot. There's a lot of new information that could be used. The companies are making big efforts to be more sustainable, to make their models more more sustainable and more effective. So the fresh and new data sets are needed. And of course, case studies based on primary data and to do publications on it, because at the moment, the industry is not publishing their numbers and their data. So it would be a good insight for the industry also to see, okay, let's see how other industries are doing it. And maybe there could be plenty of reasons why they are not doing that. Maybe they don't have the resources, maybe they don't have the people, but partnering with universities, it could be a win-win situation in that sense that universities contributing to that, and the industry gets their life cycle assessment. So it would be a good solution. And maybe more contribution to develop better standards and tools, and mainly focus on the bio-based circular products, because it's the challenging part at the moment. We are also saying that we have to play by the rules that are made up by the fossil industry or something like that, because they have a lot of really strong lobby groups and so on, so they have a lot of impact on developing different methods, methodologies, standards, and so on. But to support the bio-based circular products also. And I think it was also addressed in the morning here a little bit, that not only what at the moment is being done, but also to see a little bit further, to think about the future, because it's understandable that the regulations and methods are regulated or made up according to the products that exist right now, but to think about what will happen in the future, to regulate or give some insight for the products that will be entering the market in the future. And yes, just supporting the industry could be done based on case studies, on primary data and publications, so a win-win. And that's it from my side. Thanks.